And it now is my pleasure to invite His Excellency, Mr. Makhdoom Shah Mahmood Qureshi, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Pakistan. You have the floor, sir.
Madam President, the world is presently facing the most serious crisis since the founding of the United Nations 75 years ago. It is a dual health and economic crisis. Millions have been affected by COVID-19 virus. I myself am one of the fortunate survivors. Millions of lives are threatened unless all nations of the world respond effectively and collectively to defeat the pandemic. No one will be safe until everyone is safe. The pandemic has triggered the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression of the 1930s. It is estimated that the world economy may contract by 5%. As usual, the poorest amongst and within nations will suffer the most. 130 million people may be pushed back into poverty. We must fight hunger even as we fight the virus. The United Nations, under the leadership of the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, and the UN family of organizations have mobilized admirably to respond to the crisis. We welcome OCHA's Emergency Fund and the UN Recovery Fund proposed by Norway. We welcome the response of the IMF, World Bank, WHO, and other international organizations. But much more needs to be done to contain the virus and prevent economic collapse in a number of countries. The crisis has illustrated the essential unity of humanity. It has also exposed how unequal are the structures of global finance, trade, and investment. While the rich nations, with a population of 1.5 billion, have generated nearly $10 trillion in deficit financing to address the crisis, amounting to 10 to 20% of their GDP, developing countries with over 7 billion people are struggling to mobilize even $1 trillion, around 1% of GDP, to respond to the health and economic challenge. Despite financial difficulties, Pakistan has deployed $8 billion, 3% of GDP, to assist our disadvantaged and poor. The managing director of IMF and UNCTAD have estimated that the developing countries will need over $2.5 trillion in support to address the health and economic crisis. Bold measures are required to mobilize these resources. My Prime Minister, Imran Khan, proposed debt relief as one of the quickest ways to provide essential fiscal space to the developing countries. The reallocation of existing special drawing rights and creation of additional SDRs is another avenue to meet the financing requirements of developing countries. We hope that the Financing for Development initiative launched by the UN Secretary General with Canada and Jamaica will succeed in mobilizing the required financial support for developing countries. Madam President, the international cooperation is indispensable to respond to the pandemic and economic recession. This can be best promoted at and through the United Nations. Unfortunately, the United Nations and indeed the entire concept of multilateralism has been severely eroded by the recent by resort to hegemonianism, coercion, the arbitrary use of force, foreign intervention and occupation, and the brutal suppression of the right of peoples under colonial and alien occupation to self-determination. Pakistan is particularly concerned by the oppression and atrocities being perpetrated against the people of occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Madam President, global tensions and regional conflicts can be resolved only through strict adherence to the principles of the UN Charter, especially the non-use of force, respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states, non-interference in their internal affairs, and the existence of the right of self-determination by peoples under colonial and foreign occupation. Today, the UN Security Council is driven by divisions among major powers. These differences can and should be overcome through mutual respect for each other's legitimate national interests, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. They should be overcome through dialogue and reciprocal accommodation. This is not the time to retreat behind walls and barriers. This is not the time for stigmatization of religious or ethnic minorities. This is neither the time for exclusionary nationalism nor for blame games. Some here have called for reform and revitalization of the Security Council. It will not be revitalized by accommodating the narrow ambitions of those who seek power and privilege. Additional permanent members in the Security Council will compound, not resolve, its paralysis. Indeed, it is the small and medium-sized states with the highest stake in the UN-led world order which can help to promote an equitable and effective structure of international peace and security. Madam President, it is also vital to restore the central role of the Economic and Social Council to promote better standards of life in larger freedoms, to quote the UN Charter. The central role is essential to enable member states to address the three simultaneous goal challenges of our times: fighting COVID-19 pandemic, achieving the 2030 agenda, and preventing climate catastrophe. Pakistan looks forward to promote ECOSOC's central role in addressing these challenges during its forthcoming presidency of the Council. I thank you.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Pakistan for his statement. And I now would like to give the floor to His Excellency Jorge